funny that, Tuka, you mentioned Facebook likes, because I was wondering, Fiona and Adam, if an artist has something like 5,000 Facebook likes but has never played a live show, do you take into account, like when you're booking Secret Garden, do you take into account how big an artist is on social media, or does it matter more like, you know, they've only got 300 but they're fantastic?
It's a little bit of both, and it's really interesting at the moment with all these platforms like SoundCloud and YouTube and Facebook and things like that, where people can engage with music without having to invest in it, buy it, or go to the show or anything like that. And I find a lot as a booker, there's a lot of artists that, you know, they'll have one song and it'll get 500,000 listens on SoundCloud or something, and that will become the thrust of, you know, if they're pitching themselves or they have an agent that's pitching them, they'll say, oh, they got 500,000 listens on SoundCloud, they're massive. And then they'll put on a show and no one will come, and they'll release other singles and no one will listen. And that's, I think, quite an awful place to be in as an artist. So, I mean, pulling back from that a little bit, I think the broader context and being part of a community, along the lines of what Tuka was saying, is really important. That stuff, without a doubt, helps. And it's great getting out there and getting a lot of ears. But it needs to be followed up with actual engagement with audiences, other songs. You know, you need to be out there and doing more than just kind of having one track that gets a lot of listens.
You can't just rest on the laurels of Facebook likes or a video that's done really well, I guess, is
exactly.
What
yeah, I agree with that completely. And you could have 100,000 likes in America, but you could only have 5,000 in Australia, and what's that going to... that you're not going to be able to sell records or tour or anything off of that. Like, we've got artists that would have 100,000 likes in Australia and have 10,000 in America. So for them to go to America, it's not really viable because they don't have the audience there yet. Whereas in Australia, they would have the audience, they'd be able to tour, they'd be able to sell records.
Yeah. Melody, with Vallis Alps, they put, if anyone isn't aware of them, they put out a single late last year called Young. It did amazingly well on SoundCloud. I think it was something like a couple million.
Yeah, about 2 million.
So that's like 2 million hits just for a first single. How do you approach following that up from a management point of view where this song has just done phenomenally well? Like, I'm not saying you weren't expecting to get 2 million SoundCloud hits, but you probably weren't expecting to get 2 million SoundCloud hits.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for them, they didn't exist prior to... yeah, I mean, they didn't exist at all, and then they put up their EP without kind of anything being in place, and the SoundCloud plays just helped us get people listening to the music. So once one blog wrote about it, then a lot of blogs wrote about it, and it just helped create some sort of audience. And they actually, one of them lives in Seattle, well, one of them's from Seattle and one of them's from Canberra. And for them, it wasn't about necessarily building an audience anywhere in particular. They actually, I don't think, were even going to pursue music at the time when they did release it. And it just made it a bit real for them. It made them think or realise that actually people do like it, and maybe it might be worth pursuing. So it just kind of gave us a bit of an idea of whether people like it, whether it's worth pursuing, and just gave us, a bit of motivation as well to keep going.
Yeah, totally. Izzy, I just wanted to go back to something you said about putting it on Unearthed. There's been a lot of a focus on Triple J today of the panel, and rightfully so, because it is obviously probably the largest taste-making service in Australia. Do you think a band can be successful or reach a certain level of success without the support of Triple J?
No, I don't. And that's kind of shit.
Like, I'm not trying to rag on Triple J at all. No, they do an amazing job.
Me either. But it's kind of just the hand that we've been dealt in this country, because we don't have the demographic, we don't have the funding, we don't have the population to sustain a whole lot of different, mass media type platforms like Triple J. And it's sad, but on the other hand, I'm sure there's been a lot of great things said about Triple J, and Triple J has been instrumental in us developing as artists. We were rejected by Triple J a couple of times, and it changed us, and it pushed me especially to be a better songwriter and think about things in terms of, well,
you do have to get to a point where you're like, well, do I want my song on the radio or not? And how is that going to change the way I write? And I think the biggest, I guess, problem people have with Triple J is they go, well, they're a radio station that's funded by the government, so they should play my music, whatever that music is. And I think that is fundamentally flawed, because although anything that's funded by the public should be up for constant debate, and I support that, I also think that radio has always been a tough market. And if an Australian radio station wants to develop and push Australian talent, they need a competitive environment. They need something that's going to challenge them and go, if you want your song on the radio, it probably can't be 10 and a half minutes long. It probably can't be like this, and it needs to have a certain, whatever it is. People call it fashion, people call it,
I think the blanket term that got thrown around a little bit last year when there was a debate was the Triple J sound, which I have no idea what is, but that's what people seem to talk about a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the radio sound in general, and that's what you're always coming up against when you're an artist. Do I want my music on the radio, or am I just going to be my own thing? On a broader scale, I think looking at commercial radio, which is just abysmal in this country at the moment. I mean, it's just, you listen to I shouldn't be saying this. My manager will hate me. But, it's really difficult to listen to the radio and go, is there a place for me in all of that? And do I want a part of that? And I think it just comes back to the question of, what is success? It's, really doing what you want as an artist. But I guess also playing the system a little bit as well.
I mean, talking about commercial radio, for those that don't know, the quota is 10% Australian music a year. I saw some statistic that if you take out Shepherd's Geronimo, then it's like...
Great song.
Yeah. But that was essentially something like 7.2% of all Australian songs played on commercial radio for the whole year. Yeah. So let's just, from an industry, let's just move on from there. From an industry point of view, Melody, you used to work in PR. Obviously, Unified have a lot of artists that do get played by Triple J. What's the strategy if a bossy artist, Banks, for example, wouldn't get played by Triple J?
Banks didn't get played for a really long time. When she had an album out, we kind of sent it along to them and just shared a little bit about what's coming up for her. And I think it helps station to know that there's shows coming up or something that's a part of something bigger. So maybe sharing things that are happening for her overseas or that kind of thing generally can help a little bit. But I think it's generally the strength of a song is pretty undeniable. So it's I don't think there's anything you can really say to push anyone to play the music that you play. And I think actually with Banks, it's interesting that you do mention that, because I think we sent along the album and pushed it for an ad, and I think for about almost 2.5 months we kept checking back in every week, just saying hey, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And by complete surprise, it ended up getting...
And it's still getting played. It's still getting played quite a bit, isn't it?
It is a great album, in my opinion, but I think it was a surprise because it was much later than we actually had planned, and it wasn't really in the timeline that we had imagined. But I really feel like there's nothing you can really say to convince anyone to play your music. It really just has to be a strong song, and whether that, I think that's just, in my opinion, a strong melody or something that makes it catchy or interesting or different. Or
There's been a pretty recent focus over the past maybe 2 or 3 years where a lot of heavier bands have started getting a lot more sort of exposure from different realms that wouldn't usually touch them, and I know Unified has definitely benefited from that. How has that changed how Unified as a business work? I mean, not just from a Triple J realm, but it just feels like heavy music is definitely starting to seep into the more mainstream music industry, where previously it was like the guy knocking on the door to get into the party, and now it's been let in and it's like the cool dude doing a keg stand or something. So
I think it's harder. I don't know how many fans are out there of heavy music, but it's excellent.
There's a lot,
good.
right? I mean,
Great.
You guys are from regional areas. I know there's a lot of a regional sort of focus on the heavy music. So
yeah, and I think for a long time it was just completely underrated. People don't get it. And I love Triple J. A lot of Triple J fans don't get it. So when we are lucky enough at UNFD to have the support of Triple J, we've had In Heart's Wake recently, supported by Triple J, feature album, absolutely thrashing their songs on the radio, supported their tour, went to number 2 on the ARIA charts. So I think that their support has definitely helped that. With the Amity Affliction as well, massive support from Triple J. So it's definitely helped heavy music be noticed, and to help sell records. And, Amity Affliction, their last record went gold almost instantly. And it was, it's underrated because not everyone enjoys it. So they overlook it, and it's the fans are incredible and will always stick by the artist. So that's one thing that community has, is fans that will buy the records and listen to the music. And we luckily have the support from Triple J because they know that there's a strong fan base out there and people will listen.
Success in Australia is one thing, and you can definitely reach a pretty high level of success in Australia, but it does beg the question of, after a while, you sort of do need to move overseas. Tuka, I know Thundamentals very recently supported Hilltop Hoods overseas, or are going to?
We're going to.
Going to, okay. And Izzy, obviously, Is This How You Feel got picked up by Pitchfork early on and has definitely been beneficial of a lot of overseas sort of blogs. Is it difficult as an artist to sort of choose between, like, focusing on Australia or focusing overseas? Like,
do you mean moving overseas or just touring overseas?
I mean, both, really.
I think, going overseas is kind of pivotal if you want a career. Like, there's lots of artists that stay in Australia and they have great fans and they have that body of work that sustains them. And but I think it's a given for any artist that you want to try and crack it overseas. But it is it costs a lot of money to get over there. We were kind of lucky when we came out with Is This How You Feel. It was just a lucky break. It was 2013 and the Aussie dollar was pretty good. That's
how you get a career, kids. Watch the NASDAQ.
Riding on the back of a kangaroo. But also we were given, we won $50,000 from the Vanda and Young songwriting competition. And that went straight to getting us over to CMJ and do a bunch of festivals and go, do our first shows in London and LA. And then on the top of that, we got a $20,000 grant that was applied for by our management and a $10,000 grant through, I think, Music New South Wales and the Arts Council. Neither of those grants would exist now with the cuts that have been made by the Abbott government. And it's really sad because, a lot of people, after we won that Vanda and Young competition, assumed that, first of all, they assumed that I spent it all on clothes, which I only spent a little bit of it on clothes. But no, all of that money went to just getting us over there. It's hugely expensive. Even if you play to 150 people, 200 people, which you're basically starting again, it's a huge expense. You've got crew, accommodation and flights. You've got accommodation and flights for everyone in the band. You've got per diems. You've got, just general expenses of travelling, which if anyone here has been travelling, you know how expensive it is. You've got water. You want to buy a trashy magazine. There are all these things. This is just me. I'm just coming across
it's okay.
The most
Tour
awful
secrets
person.
with the Preatures, guys.
But yeah, it's, I remember talking to Doc Neeson before he died. He was the lead singer in The Angels, and they were a hugely successful band in Australia, made a lot of money from publishing, and then tried to crack it in America and ended up heavily in debt and pretty broken as a band. And that does happen. But I think you've got to give it a go. So that's what we're all out there doing. There's a whole contingent of Australian bands all over the world, which is great. It makes it easier.
Yeah.
And it also makes it easier that wherever you go overseas, everyone wants to know what's happening in Australia because there's just something going on here. There's just really good music.
I think we can thank Tame Impala to a degree for that. I mean, they're obviously so insanely successful overseas. They were like 6th highest on the Coachella bill, which is real. And, you know, even Vance Joy, Chet Faker, all of these artists are really, they're not just doing like, oh, they're doing well. They're actually smashing it to a degree that a lot of Australian artists have never really gotten to before, apart from Joe Dolce or someone like that. So,
well, there was, I think it also runs back to that there was a history of bands doing really well in the States and the UK, like In Excess were massive. The Divinals were massive.
Even the Vines played on, you know, Letterman, Conan.
The Vines, Jet. I mean, there is a history of bands doing very, very well. Men at Work, top in America, number 1 in America.
Won a Grammy.
Yeah. But it's also gone hand in hand, I think, with Aussies kind of disowning them and going, well, like, who do you think you are? Like, you know, get fucked. Like, you're too big for us now, you know. And I don't think that's happening so much anymore. I think Australian music listeners are really happy that their bands are doing well. And, you know, it's a sense of pride for us that, you know, we're known for good music around the world, which we are.
Tucker, I know like the Australian hip-hop scene is very sort of tight-knit and insular to a degree. Have you ever experienced, you know, Thundamentals are reaching a point where they're very successful. Have you ever experienced any of that sort of cultural cringe or tall poppy about going overseas and, you know, selling out 1,000-cap venues instead of 200-cap places?
Yeah, there's, I suppose there is a cultural cringe about Australian hip-hop that, you know, I've really tried to challenge from day one. But taking that overseas, it's kind of ironic because that's the only thing that's going to make me different to the rest of hip-hop is having my identity. So I kind of have to wear it, I suppose. But, you know, the Hoods and Bliss and Esso are working through, you know, Canada and through North America because there's open-mindedness. There's regions that have open-mindedness because unlike a big pop group or whatever, we are very niche and there's nothing we can do about that. Unless you want to emulate real hardcore pop music, which really I'm not really that interested in. I like a particular type of thing. It works for me. If I try to do something like that, like a big pop album, it probably will sink because it's not who I am.
Yeah.
So yeah, strategically it may work. I think there's like, again, North America, parts of Germany, Europe, that'll really help. But yeah, it's not like we can do world domination as yet.
Going back to success on a local level, so far today there seems to be a general consensus that without a booker or a manager, it's pretty hard to play shows. And I guess the fact of the matter is there's a lot of artists that just never have a booker or a manager and can even reach a level of success. You know, Kingswood didn't have a manager for 5 years. Adam, when sort of booking something at Opera Bar or even booking something at Good God or booking Secret Garden, if an artist didn't have a manager or if someone like Artist Voice or Select Music didn't message you but the band messaged you themselves, was there a bit of a stigma around booking them?
That's a really difficult one to answer because ideally I would like to say no, not at all. And, you know, even in terms of my background, you know, I guess growing up musically in the music that I'm interested in, that kind of DIY spirit is really important to me.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just the bands don't want a booker or a manager.
Without a doubt, a lot of artists kind of make a point of not having that personnel around them for whatever reason. Look, I think as a booker, whether it's for a venue or a festival, you really need to be careful and at times vigilant to make sure that you're engaged with the musical community around you and not just taking cues from, you know, managers and touring agents and people like that who, you know, they do have their finger on the pulse and a pitch or an endorsement from them at times does carry a degree of weight to it. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it does probably make it easier to, like, as a booker, to get behind it, if only because you know, there's going to be people other than the artists themselves promoting the tour, backing the tour. There is probably going to be some kind of infrastructure, and that's important. At the same time, I mean, I don't think artists should feel like they have to have that personnel because every, artist and band and community within the broader music scene is different. And sometimes, I've worked with artists who have taken on a booking agent or a manager, and it's been really detrimental to what they do. So, that's a really vague answer, I know, but it really does depend on context.
So this is a really open question to everyone here. What would you say to someone that came up to you and they're just, managers aren't interested, bookers aren't interested, but they still want to get shows and they still want to play, and maybe they've gotten a little bit of unearthed play, but they just sort of want to reach that new level without sort of having industry backing. Is there a way to do that at all? Open question, everyone.
Definitely. It's like, this is the key point about anything is if you make good content and put it out online, nowadays, you will get traction. And I think, one thing to always remember is, these managers or label reps or even the radio, they're not your boss. The people that you're making your music for and listening to, they're your real boss. So kind of impressing them, once you get a fan base, you'll see managers and labels coming to you. In fact, that's a better look. You don't want to be asking people to be represented. You want a line of people that want to represent you. And the only way you're going to get that is if you impress your real boss, i.e. people that buy music or attend gigs. So, yeah. But
I agree.
It does help.
Absolutely. I mean, we... at UNFD, we go to a lot of shows. We see a lot of local bands and a lot of young hardcore bands that are, really trying. I'm from Melbourne, and there's a really healthy music scene there. And we put out a record at the start of this year by a band called Storm the Sky. Not really, really well known, but they work hard, and they put out their EP, and that sold so many copies that impressed the label. So the label noticed. So that's a really good point, because if you do these things, you read about it, you hear about it, people will notice. And they will be curious, and they'll want to see you, and they'll want to talk to you, and eventually we sign them, and they're doing really well. So, yeah.
Can I just add as well? I don't think you ever necessarily need a manager or anything like that, because, and I've given the same advice to a lot of my friends who are musicians themselves, that so long as you can make the music that you want to make and create what you want to create, and you have the time to be able to manage yourself, then by all means do that. But when it gets to the point where, it's taking up too much of your time and you're doing a lot of admin when you should actually be creating, then that's maybe when actually a manager is...
I think that's the best thing to say. A manager isn't needed if you've played one show and have gotten a little bit of community radio airplay. A manager should be needed when it's becoming way too much for you to book your own shows as well as do the band and everything like that. And I think a lot of bands fall into a trap of, as soon as the first booking agent talks to them, they sign to them straight away. And I've heard some stories that it's bad as well. So it's more a case-by-case basis than an actual genuine signing to a manager is bad, signing to a manager is good. I think what I want everyone to get out of today is that you have to take it case by case, and everyone's story, every artist's story, everybody that works in music story is completely different. There's not one career trajectory that anyone can make. So it's kind of dumb to balance to try and emulate someone else's career trajectory, because it's just not possible.
And one thing I would like to add, going back to your original question, Dom, when it comes to things like booking venues and booking shows without, the context of a manager or a booking agent, I do agree with Tuka that, great music gets found and gets engaged with whether or not that personnel are there. But one thing I would like to say, I guess from, a venue and to an extent a festival perspective on it, is running those events and running venues is expensive and it's really difficult. So the flip side to that is if you don't have that kind of context around you, I think being aware of, your community and where you're positioned and things like that are important. Being a new artist, if you don't have a lot of eyes on you at the moment, often booking a big headline show can be a mistake, and it can be costly for you, it can be costly for a venue. And I think making sure that you're engaged with your local community, whether that's a geographical community or based on the genre or the niche that you're in.
An online community.
Exactly right, yeah. Making sure that you're a part of that, there are other bands that you can play with, there's people that can, champion what you're doing, and that you're part of a greater kind of ecosystem of what's happening. I think that's really essential regardless of whether you have that personnel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
I
can't
totally agree with Adam. It's all about community and songs. Like, I remember when I was starting out in the Preatures, and it would really baffle us, like, how do we get to the industry part?
Yeah.
You know, like, what is that? And it was this really unattainable kind of just mystery to us. And, you know, it really just comes down to writing better songs and just working on your craft and working on what you're doing and trying to find, like, you know, Andy was saying before, your own story, like, and being legitimate about it. And I mean, we've only got one album out, and I still don't feel like I'm legitimate in what I do. But like, I just remember, you know, going and hanging out, watching bands, and then going, oh, you know, how do you get a gig? And you guys can come and do a gig with us. And you start at the bottom and you work your way up. And sometimes you work your way up and then you go right back down to the bottom. And that probably happened to us a couple of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you know, if you're in Sydney, go to the gallery bar at Oaf and get a job. You know, get a job.
I used to book there. It's not that hard.
Get a gig there. You know, we used to play there heaps for, like, they'd pay us like $50 and we'd do a show there. And or like Brighton Up Bar. There's a new small bar opening on Oxford Street called Oxford Tavern or Oxford Circus, I think. And they're going to do about 100 capacity. It's RF who runs Low Bar. It's his new place. But yeah, just try and find places and fall in and get to know the people in your community. Like, you know, out in Marrickville and Newtown, like the social club there.
Waywoods upstairs at the bank.
Yeah.
Like, I guess the one good thing about Sydney is that we definitely don't have a lack of small venues. There's so many places
I would say we do, like, compared to Melbourne.
Probably compared to
and
Melbourne.
Brisbane.
Yeah.
And
but, I mean,
Perth.
for a young band, compared to everywhere else in Australia, but we don't have a lack.
Hey, we're beating Adelaide, that's one thing.
Take that, Snowtown.
I would say that Sydney is probably lacking in the live music venue department. But that also, you know, I did a panel the other night with Jake at Good God, and we were talking about this and the lockout laws and, you know, all the things that give Sydney a really bad reputation as a live music city and a nightlife city. They become your strength as a band because it's really difficult and there isn't really an underground scene here. It's like you have to kind of jump up to playing, you know, 500 capacity venues quite quickly, whether that's as an opener or support or whatever. But that will push you to be, you know, a better band, whatever that means.
To be
like,
ambitious and not be comfortable playing 100 cap venues your whole life.
And that seems to be kind of indicative of, you know, a lot of bands that have come out of Sydney and a lot of the electronic scene that's kind of flourishing here and has flourished for the last couple of years.
Just one more question before I open up the floor to everyone, because I'm sure there's a bunch of questions. With CD sales really just falling completely out of conversation and streaming services not offering an insanely artist-friendly model yet, do you think there'll ever be a time where artists can legitimately make money off recorded music? Or is it live income that is going to, like, that's going to pay everyone's wages as far as artists go?
I think ticket sales, definitely.
Yeah.
Ticket sales is where the money's at. Merch is also a really big way.
That's also good because the bands buy the merch themselves.
Absolutely.
And then can sell it completely, so you're sort of cutting out the middleman.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, our artists are touring constantly, all the time, and merchandise, your products, is what people are going to buy. People don't just want music anymore. They want
You're not
other
Fugazi,
things.
you should probably get merch.
Well, for us as well, vinyl is making a big comeback. It's a collectible, and we put out a lot of different colourways and lots of different styles, and we actually, one of our bands, we just launched pre-orders on Friday for a record, and 300 sold overnight. You know, like it is selling. You just got to find a way to sell it. But I think as well, ticket sales, merch. I think that's
I'm pretty sure, I won't say the band name, but a band that's Australian, they paid for their whole studio, like renting out a studio and recorded their first album just by merch sales.
Yeah.
And you can really kill it with good socks.
I feel like it was more around the question of recorded music, the actual thing that we do.
Yeah.
What we're meant to do and make money off, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like it's a really layered question, and it's really difficult, and you can make sacrifices in different ways. So on my last solo record, I paid for that out of my back pocket, and that made me full-time musician because I could take 100% of all my CD sales. And so even though I didn't do amazing numbers, I got 100% of everything. Whereas I was used to working with my band, Thundamentals, in a label, they got a huge chunk, and so we had to tour heaps. Whereas with my solo stuff, I don't have to tour as much because I get a lot more out of it. So in some ways, like, that recorded music made me who I am today.
Yeah.
In terms of just financing.
And also viewing it from two completely different perspectives, like the label perspective and the DIY perspective. It's
you get to network, you get to cheat and use their things, like their little tricks.
Find the ways to talk to people. Yeah.
But your bartering system's opened up because you know the two different ways of doing things. But that being said, like, you're kind of right. Like, I don't know how I signed to a major recently, and I don't know how I'm ever going to pay that money back or make heaps of money unless I go huge. And it will be my hustling of a live thing on the side anyway. But still, that being said, there's no rules. Like, if you have a cool fan base, they're going to buy your music if you ask them to. Like, you have to ask sometimes, but they'll buy it. Like, it's your relationship you have with your boss, I think.
And I think there's so little money in recorded music there's no one's going to call you a sellout for signing to a major label. It's like, good on you for actually being able to make money out of music. That is fantastic, you know? Cool. Well, if anybody's got any questions for anyone here, you had your hand up first. We'll just wait. Yeah. Oh, okay. You'll go next, I promise.
So I'm a drummer in a metal... This is a question directed towards you at UNFD. I'm a drummer in a metal band. I'm studying music business. There's been something I've been trying to figure out where I think there's a huge kind of disconnect between the amount of people that go to like Soundwaves or any international touring bands, and there's a disconnect between that and supporting local bands. How would you access that, and how do you kind of bridge that gap at all?
Well, our artists all were local bands.
Yeah.
You know, that's how they started, and it's all about playing those shows, getting those fans, keeping those fans as you grow. So In Heart's Wake, who just released a new album last year on their album tour, because they did a record exactly a year apart, they played in Sydney at Blacktown PCYC to 300 kids. This year they sold out the Roundhouse, 2,200 people. So it's their fans that have followed them from when they were this small band to where they are now. And it's hard work, you know, and it's all about meeting people, meeting other bands, and having that network around you to help you, to support you, to grow, to be one of those other bands that, you know, and with Soundwave as well, Unearth, they do the winners every year that you can open up the main stage at Soundwave. It's making and taking those opportunities and finding them. So, do it.
Trying.
Cool. Over there? That's some mighty fine networking, guys. Keep it up.
See, that's a perfect example.
Just talking to the mic.
What are some ways of like most effectively approaching a label, management, like a management company and a booking agent, and you know, with a press kit and stuff for online stuff? What would you include in that?
Can I answer this?
Yes.
I used to do that a lot when we were starting out, and it's actually detrimental to. I wouldn't recommend approaching anybody.
Okay.
And that would, if I could go back in time and give myself one piece of advice, it'd be don't sell yourself. It's not a good look.
Okay.
It's just not cool.
Sweet.
And people in the industry don't respond to it. They won't even read. They won't even look at your press kit.
Okay.
Just focus on the songs, getting the band together, playing shows. You know, once you have enough money, you can do some demos, make some, you know, recordings, put them up, and then if they hit people in the right way, people will come to you, and that's the only way to do it. I promise you.
There's nothing more sad than getting that, hey, thanks for the email, we'll check out, cheers, so-and-so, back after you've tried to send it to a label head and, like...
you don't even get that.
Yeah, just completely ignored.
Yeah, from a festival booking point of view, unfortunately, that's really quite largely true. Unfortunately.
They'll come after you if they think you're good.
Yeah, look, I mean, working in venues and festivals, they come through thick and fast and all the time. And as much as I love the idea of kind of engaging with them wholeheartedly and, you know, drawing out really good material from that, and sometimes it does happen, to be honest, not often. All the times I've fallen in love with a band have been in venues, watching them live. And that could be, you know, a tiny room where it's the opening band, and I say, you know, that band's incredible. I want to work with them, whether it's now or whether it's in a year's time. And it comes back to that idea of, you know, getting on bills, being part of that local community. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I think the biggest way that people, whether they're, you know, managers, booking agents, booking festivals of all different types of genres, they love to discover things and to be in front of bands and fall in love with them, and that is always going to be the most effective way.
Any other questions? Yeah, down the front here.
Oh, it's my way to the microphone.
Yeah, okay.
I just wanted to ask you two in particular how important you think authenticity is as far as songwriting goes today, like to be a successful songwriter, and if you ever listen to something.
So if anyone didn't hear that, he was wondering how important authenticity is to be a successful songwriter.
Yeah, I'll just repeat that. So I was just wondering how important you think authenticity is as far as... Yeah.
3 times. Let's go for a 4th.
Yeah, like, do you think authenticity is important these days, and do you ever hear things on the radio and just think they're full of shit? Like, they might make some money, but are they being authentic, and is that important?
Well, I mean, authenticity in music is one of the oldest debates in music. I mean, it's so hard to define what is authentic for one person and authentic for another person. People fell in love with Elvis and thought he was authentic, and other people thought he was just a hack, you know, and everything about it was a front. I mean, performing in itself, if you talk about performing as opposed to songwriting, is a great lie. And so is songwriting to a certain degree. You know, it's artifice. It's I really loved what Andy was talking about before when he was saying, you know, you just can't control it, what comes out of you. That doesn't mean that it's authentic. In fact, sometimes it's less authentic. You know, they're going, well, I'd love this song to be me and my story, but it's just God, there it goes. It's done. It's off on its own thing, you know. But if what you're asking is how important is authenticity to the artist or to people who are listening to music, people are always looking for what's next, you know, and what's gonna hit them, and you can't control that. Iggy Azalea is a great example of that. Like, so many people love her music and listen to her, but as Australians we go, well, she's an Aussie singing in an American accent. Does that make her less of an artist? I don't know. I can't answer that. I'm not sure.
Yes, it's about what you find authentic personally. There's no barometer for, oh, this is authentic, this isn't authentic. You know?
But I mean, David Bowie, look at him. He wasn't authentic. He was the thin white Duke, and then, you know.
Yeah. And when it is authentic, often it's a little bit off-putting. Like, you know, you could say Sun Kill Moon is authentic, but I don't want it to be authentic.
I think authenticity is whatever it takes to make the song believable, to make people believe the song, because it's all about the song. It always comes back to the song, and if the song will endure, and that's all that matters.
Any more questions? Yeah? Do we have time for a few more? One more? Okay, I picked you. Sorry. Oh, okay. Greg picked you, I guess. Either or.
My question is for you, Fiona. Why does Unified do stuff with Rise Records?
So in Australia, UNFD distributes other record labels. So we distribute Hopeless Records, which has All Time Low, Newfound Glory. Yeah. We also distribute Fearless Records, which is Pierce the Veil, are the artists. So when they want an outlet to release it in our country, we're their go-to.
Okay.
So Rise do that for us in America. So they distribute North Lane in Hearts Wake. So it helps us to get our artists into America. So that's how that connection came apart.
Does that help with touring over there when they go over there, like album sales and getting more
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So North Lane touring over there, headline tour, and that's been helpful because we've got that relationship with Rise Records, and that's helped to sell. So yeah, it's definitely helped our artists there.
Cool. Okay, guys, thank you. Oh no, yeah, that's it. Cool. Thank you so much for all the panelists. Thanks for watching. Let's all just clap.